Hello everyone, so we are about to get started. If you could find a seat. We know we're fairly limited on seats, so there are some additional seating if you go into the room to my right. If not, I'm sure you can just stay at the back. You get a nice view through the window to the panel over here. So yeah, if everyone could take their seat, we'll start in a couple of seconds. Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the Brussels launch of the Jacques Delors report, Energy Union 2.0 to deliver the European Green Deal. My name is Kira Taylor. I'm a climate and energy journalist based here in Brussels. This morning I'll be moderating as we look at the evolution of EU energy policy and dive into the Jacques Delors report on the case for an Energy Union 2.0. We're really happy that there's a big turnout, and we're sure we'll have a really interesting discussion. The report was launched in November 2023. It proposes ways to enhance the current energy union to bring it up to date and implement the European Green Deal. There is, of course, already an energy union. It was proposed in 2015 by the European Commission and aimed to create affordable, secure and sustainable energy. The strategy rested on 5 pillars: energy security, an integrated internal energy market, energy efficiency, decarbonising the economy, and research and innovation. This was turned into green laws in the Clean Energy for All Europeans package. But as everyone here knows, much has changed since then. Europe has a 55% net emissions reduction target for 2030 and a whole range of new green laws. Europe has also weathered war, pandemic, and an energy crisis. Indeed, in recent years, it has become clear that EU energy was neither affordable or secure. The EU has taken steps to try and tackle this. We'll hear from our speakers today whether they think that is enough. And as we look ahead to the European elections and the next EU term, it's important to think about what policy is needed to ensure Europe's energy is affordable, secure, and sustainable. The Jacques Delors report on an Energy Union 2.0 does just that. Key elements include a more European, goal-orientated and collaborative energy and climate governance, a larger EU budget aimed at energy resilience, security and prosperity, and a democratic renewal including permanent citizens' assemblies on climate and resilience and stakeholder dialogue at the national and regional level. Over the course of the event, we'll hear from expert speakers taking stock of where we are and what should happen next in EU energy policy. We'll start with an introduction to the Energy Union as a key element of the single market by President of the Jacques Delors Institute, Enrico Letta. This will be followed by a keynote speech on the EU's progress on energy and the remaining challenges by Dieter Jorgensen, Director General for Energy at the European Commission. After this, there will be a quick audience Q&A, so make sure to think up some questions. We'll then have a presentation of the report by Camille Defa, head of the Jacques Delors Energy Centre. To look further into this, there will be a panel discussion with reflection group members who help compile the report. We also want to involve you in that, so there will be an audience Q&A as part of it. During both of our Q&A sessions, you can simply raise your hand and we will bring across a microphone and you can ask your question. We'll try and get through as many as possible, so please try and keep your questions short. Last but not least, Anne Mettler, Vice President for Europe at Breakthrough Energy, will give our closing remarks. We also invite you to stay for lunch and continue the discussion. So, a packed agenda, we'd better get started. To kick off our event, I'd like to invite Enrico Letta, President of the Jacques Delors Institute, to give his opening remarks. You have the floor.
Thank you, and thank you all for being here. It's a really great opportunity, and thank you so much all. I'm here. I'm very happy to be here, first of all, to take notes because of the report on the future of the single market that I'm tasked to write for next April. And it will be, of course, a great opportunity today to have the idea, the feeling of where we are and what are the reactions to the report that, as Jacques Delors Institute, we proposed and we are discussing here. I have to say that I have always in mind the smile of Jacques Delors when 1 year and a half ago, after the invasion, the Russian invasion to Ukraine, he told me, you know, that the idea of energy union was his idea of 13, 14 years ago, 15 years ago. And he told me that we needed Putin to make all the European leaders aware that we need energy union. And today we are here at the beginning of a discussion that will bring us in the next legislature, in the next European legislature, and it is clear that the need for a strong acceleration on energy union is there, and it will be probably one of the main priorities of the next legislature. We had many important realizations during the last years, and we are here also to discuss on these realizations. I had a very interesting discussion, bilateral discussion with Director General Jürgensen just now, exactly for the report on the future of the single market. And in reality, we had many important achievements, but we know very well that the expectations changed completely in the last period. The expectations of what Europe can deliver on that. The level of expectations 5 years ago were completely different. 4 years ago were completely different. Today, the expectations from companies, from the economic system, from citizens are completely different. So the European Union, the European Commission, the European institutions, we know very well that the next 5 years will be years in which we need to deliver, and we need to launch new ideas on how, I am very clear and very frank on that, on how to create maybe a new balance, well working between the level of member states' decisions and the level of European decisions. Because it is clear that the treaties are creating fascinating mix, if I may say, between role of member states and role of the Union, both on board. And it is very complicated now to understand that this role needs to have all really very well cooperating. I'm sure that everyone is doing his job and will do his job, but it's absolutely necessary to have this 2.0, this evolution. First of all, because of the interconnections, we know very well that the system needs a new level, a new effectiveness level of interconnections. We know very well that this interconnection level is absolutely needed, not for granted, very complicated. This interconnections level needs also a new level of attention towards neighboring countries. I have to say neighboring countries will be another big issue for the next 5-10 years with the enlargement topic. The enlargement will be the other key issue for the next 5-10 years. And at the same time, we understood that the mix and the differences among the different member states are creating today another big issue. And the other big issue is the problem of the costs, the prices, and of course the link with the elephant in the room in this very period, that is the state aid policy on energy. Is of course one of the main topics, the influence of state aid policies on an issue which is so decisive on competitiveness. I spent last days in the US meeting the people of IRA, because I know how much IRA is playing a role in the US. I think we have to be proud of the fact that we were first and we influenced the US. I consider that as a point of pride, but I think also we need to take into consideration the fact that they are going very fast, and they have probably tools that are more effective on the taxation side, than our tools. So the challenge is there. I would like to thank our team at the Jacques Delors Institute, Camille Defar, first of all, and all the team, Sylvie Matelli, the new director. The Jacques Delors Institute made a fantastic work last year. In last years, Thomas was the founder of this center, and I'm very happy of what we did until now. We had a very good conversation in December in Paris on the single market and also on energy impact on the single market, but I'm sure that today's conversation will be really an upgrade of our conversation and of our targets. I'm sure that in the name of Jacques Delors, we will be able to make next legislature the legislature of the true energy union. And I'm sure that citizens, as always Jacques Delors said, citizens are the center of everything. We are institutions, we are commission, we are bureaucrats, we are stakeholders, but citizens are the center. And we have to be aware that citizens' expectations today are very, very high. And our today's conference will be, I think, very important to set up the scene and the debate for the European elections, to help me and my team for the presentation, the preparation of the high-level report on the future of the single market, to help also Mario Draghi's team for the presentation, the preparation, the presentation of the parallel report on competitiveness that he is supposed to present after the European election to the President of the European Commission. And thank you all for the presence here today. Thanks.
Thank you. An excellent reminder that citizens are at the heart of the European Union, something I'm sure a lot of us are beginning to be aware of again ahead of the European elections. Next, I'd like to invite Dr. Jul Jorgensen, Director General for Energy at the European Commission, up to the stage. She will speak on progress made in EU energy and the remaining challenges. She has been in her role since 2019, so is in an excellent position to tell us how far we've come so far. After her keynote, we'll have a quick Q&A, so make sure to think up some questions while you're listening. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Kira. Good morning. Thank you very much, Enrico, for having invited me here and for the very good meeting. We just had to look ahead at energy policy in the single market over the coming years. The event and the report are very, very timely and a welcome input to the reflection that is ongoing on how to best shape European energy policy for the coming mandate towards 2030. And of course, we are here very much in the spirit and remembrance of Jacques Delors, a true European leader, a true European. And it's clear that everything we do, he still lives here, in the foundations he has said, in the vision he has for Europe, and in his care for European citizens. So it is a true honor to be here. This is the last year of this mandate. We are preparing for the next mandate as we go into the European elections later this spring. It's a great opportunity to look back at what we have done, what has happened since 2019, but also very much to look ahead. What are the expectations? What can Europe do? How do we make the best of our common? And I've got a few key messages in that regard. The first one goes back to where we were in 2019. We launched the European Green Deal. President Ursula von der Leyen launched that as a top priority of this mandate of the European Commission. And as part of the European Green Deal, the energy landscape has gone through a deep transformation already. And of course, that deep transformation has been further accelerated, but also put under pressure and challenged by the energy crisis we have seen, resulting both from the reopening after, or rather the closure during the COVID crisis, but also the reopening that created a supply-demand imbalance in global energy markets, and then further impounded, further triggered by the Russian invasion into Ukraine, and what was a Russian weaponization of energy already well before the invasion into Ukraine. I was just about to say the rest is history, but I think everyone here certainly has been following closely what has happened during the crisis and the European response to the crisis and the standing together to help make sure that we would get through the crisis without risking our security, our sustainability, and our socio-economic texture. We in the European Commission put forward just 2 weeks after the invasion the Repower EU plan, looking at setting out a plan for how could we reduce our dependence on Russian fossil fuels as quickly as possible. We had a number of clear principles underpinning this Repower EU plan, and one was we would want to make sure that everything we did was aligned with the European Green Deal objectives of climate neutrality in 2050. That was not difficult because the reality is that the response to the different crises, whether it's the climate crisis or the energy crisis, the response is pretty much the same. We need to accelerate the rollout of renewables. We need to accelerate the deployment of clean energy. We need to become more energy efficient, make better use of the energy that we have. And then, of course, we need to have our better integrated energy system, both in terms of interconnection and infrastructure, but also in terms of making use of the different parts of the system. And so that was the natural response. Now, a few words about how did we do on repowering the European Union in response to the Russian invasion and the Russian weaponization of gas. Now, first of all, before the war, we imported around 150 billion cubic meters of natural gas from Russia, fossil gas from Russia, through pipelines. And that was a far too high dependence on any one supplier. We were above 40% in Europe and much higher in some member states. And we have actually managed to cut that significantly. The 150 became 80 billion cubic meters in 2022, 40 billion cubic meters in 2023. So we are in a very clear downward trend and a significant shift in the composition of the fossil gas molecules that we consume within the European Union, with LNG having replaced a lot of the Russian gas. But the Repower EU plan built on 3 pillars. We wanted to have more renewables. We wanted to reduce our consumption, more savings, more energy efficiency. And then we wanted to replace the Russian molecules by clean molecules wherever possible. Biomethane is a good example, or at least by other molecules rather than the Russian ones. We managed to reduce our consumption very significantly through energy savings and through investments into energy efficiency. We cut by 18% our gas demand at the first part of the crisis, and we continue that. And then we have accelerated very, very significantly the rollout of renewables, generating now 22% of our electricity, and for the first time ever overtaking natural gas as the primary source of electricity. It will get even better in 2023. The rollout, the deployment of renewables has taken a further hike up, and we expect that to continue in 2024. And then we have also, as part of Repower EU, made significant changes in the regulatory framework and the legislative framework and the market, how we built it and how we make sure that is aligned both with the crisis response but also with the European Green Deal. We further increased our ambitions for renewable energy and for energy efficiency in 2030 under Repower EU, and then we did a review of the electricity market design to make sure that it was better placed in light of what we had learned during the crisis as regards electricity pricing, but also in light of the objective of further accelerating the rollout and the investments into renewables to better incentivize renewables and make sure that consumers could benefit from the lower cost energy that we get from renewable sources through longer term pricing arrangements such as power purchasing agreements and contracts for difference. So very significant shifts in that framework to help European consumers and businesses as well, and to strengthen our internal electricity market and our internal energy market. So the European Green Deal, and that's my first message, really has stayed at the top of the agenda and has become a driver both of the response to the climate crisis, but also a driver and a further contribution to the response to the energy crisis and to the challenges we see resulting from the geopolitical context. And now, despite that first message, my second message is we still have significant challenges, and all the more reason that the report from the Jacques Delors Institute is very welcome because it helps identify some of the work that we have ahead of us. Now, the first point in terms of the challenges is European competitiveness. We pay more for our energy than our main competitors, than global markets. And so energy prices is an important aspect in competitiveness. We have global leadership in the green and clean technology sector, but we are under immense pressure. The global playing field is not level. We have challenges with respect to supply chains. We have challenges with respect to critical raw materials. We have manufacturing capacity, but we need to further strengthen that, and we need more skills. So we have taken action under the Net Zero Industrial Plan, the Net Zero Industrial Act, but there's really still more to be done in that area. Your report, Enrico, on the internal market is a critical factor there. And of course, as you've also said, together with in complementarity to the report that Professor Draghi has been asked to do on competitiveness, to help again identify both the challenges and some of the necessary components of an answer. Now, linked to competitiveness is investment. We know that in order to achieve our targets in 2030 for energy, for the European Green Deal, climate, environment, transport, we're going to need about 1.2 trillion in investments every year. That is a lot of investments, and they're not going to come from public budgets. So we are going to need significantly higher levels of private investments. The capital is there, and we need to make sure that the framework for putting that capital, for investing that capital into the green growth and into the green transition, that is happening. So we need to work to improve the investment climate, including through de-risking, so that we can leverage the necessary private financing, but also through simplification, lowering permitting times and administrative barriers. There's still a lot that can be done to facilitate and scale up investments. And then we have, of course, the common framework for how do we operate in energy policy. We've got what we call the governance regulation, the energy union governance, which has served as well with national energy and climate plans. But coming to some of the points that you have also mentioned, Enrico, there is a question of what are the national decisions? How do these decisions impact the European energy security, the European energy affordability, the European energy sustainability, and how do we make sure that we take the decisions that help build those common interests? And that brings me to my third message, which is essentially around the governance regulation and the next steps. The European governance in the energy union has really helped set a coherent and common framework building on the national energy and climate plans, covering both energy and climate policy and measures. We are carrying out a review and evaluation that is currently ongoing of the governance regulation, and that is a great opportunity to look at what does the governance of the Energy Union 2.0 look like, what more can we do to strengthen that framework to make the best use of it. Now, one clear theme in that context is, of course, simplification. We have put in place an impressive common legislative and regulatory framework over these last years, but there is also significant administration and challenges linked to that. So if we can simplify to make it more operational, to help make sure that it delivers both at national level and at European level, then that is a good thing, both for member states, for private operators, for businesses, for investors, and of course at European level. Another aspect to look at is how do we best balance national decisions and European interests? We have the framework to do that, and that is of course part of the review as well, looking at what does it mean for the internal energy market and what does it mean for building the energy union. So an important work stream ahead, where your Jacques Delors Institute report provides very interesting and useful input and reflections that can help us take that forward. So I wish you an interesting discussion today, certainly a useful discussion also from our perspective, and very much from the perspective of all Europeans in terms of building Europe towards 2030 and towards climate neutrality in 2050. Thank you very much.
So we now do the Q&A. So if you'd like to take a seat, maybe on that one, you'll have a microphone ready for you. Excellent. So do we have any questions from the audience following that? We have a couple. Is there a microphone to go around? Yes. So we have one at the front and then maybe one at the back, and we'll take a few together, if the microphone's working. Don't worry, we're just giving you time to think of more questions. We have one at the front here and then maybe one at the back.
Thank you. I'm not sure if this is working. There we go. Heather Grady from Bruegel, the think tank here. So you emphasised several times the role of energy efficiency. And we've seen the way that economists were quite amazed by how fast the market reacted to the rising prices for energy. But a lot of economic modelling still assumes that demand for energy is essentially inflexible, it's inelastic. So how far can sufficiency in energy usage be a fundamental part of the energy union going forward? You mentioned grid upgrades and improving infrastructure and technical solutions as well, but is there also a goal of absolute demand reduction as we go forward, not only shifting from using gas, for example, to electricity, so electrification of the economy, but simply reducing overall energy demand? Would that be a good route towards strategic autonomy in energy?
Excellent. I'd like to take a couple at once. So maybe we had one at the back, the gentleman with his hand up there.
Thank you very much. Jakub Gorzkowski, PGE. I would like to ask a question about the almost forgotten piece of the European Green Deal, namely the Energy Taxation Directive. Do you expect the next Commission to make another attempt to put it forward, or maybe we should look for different solutions to tackle these challenges? Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe we can ask those. So energy efficiency and energy taxation directive, what's your response to those?
Thank you very much for the good questions. Heather, indeed, the absolute reduction of demand is what we've seen over these last few years of crisis. There has actually been a reaction to the very high prices, and we see that continued lowering demand, which is a combination of genuine savings, fuel shifts, and efficiencies in industrial processes, but also, of course, a structural reduction in industrial output, which is not a good thing. And so I think when we talk about sufficiency and absolute demand, we really need to look at what is the most cost-efficient and cost-effective way of using the energy we have, and how do we make sure that any reduction in demand does not have a negative impact on the European economy and the European social fabric again. So energy efficiency is more about the intensity of our energy use and more about being better at using the energy we have. Technologies have a huge impact on that. And what's interesting is we actually have the technologies out there that can help us be more energy efficient, but we need to invest more in them. And the investments into energy efficiency makes a lot of sense both economically and in a climate context, but it's typically a more complex set of interests, and that slows down the investments into energy efficiency. So I think we can do more there. Earlier this week, the Commission came out with an artificial intelligence package, and artificial intelligence is a clear technology where there are savings to be made in an energy context. We have smart meters, we have demand-side flexibility, so a lot can be done there to really help bring down demand in a way that is still good, not just for the climate, but also for the economy, or not just for the economy, but also for the climate, depending on which way you're looking at it. So I would hesitate on a sufficiency discussion as such, because we also want to see a continued European coming back to the citizens and how citizens see a benefit in Europe. Then I think we need to find a balance and do it in the cleverest possible way. On Energy Taxation Directive, it's such a good question, and the question is so good that I barely have an answer for it, because the answer does not primarily lie here. We know the treaty framework requiring unanimity for changes in that field, and that has proven to be quite a challenge. I think the last two mandates of the Commissions over the last decade, there have been attempts to make changes to the Energy Taxation Directive to simply make sure, even if it's not very ambitious, but simply to make sure that it aligns with our common objectives that have been agreed at the level of the 27 heads of state and government. Because our objectives for 2050, for 2030 are not put into question. So we do need to make sure that the taxation directive and the legislation related to that align with those objectives. So I cannot say how that will be taken forward in the next mandate, but it's certainly something that we do need to come back to or continue.
Thank you. We have time for a couple more questions. There's one at the front, and then we can do front and back again. So one down here, and then one maybe at the back.
Thank you. Francesca Stevens with the European Packaging Industry. I have a question about nuclear. And you have mentioned that in your introduction, but I was wondering if nuclear will remain a taboo question for the European Union, or if that will be part of the plan. We know that there was an initiative by some member states to put nuclear back on the map, but how can we really achieve net zero without nuclear and only with renewables? Thanks.
Thank you. And then one question from the back.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm Adolfo Aiello from Eurofer, the Steel Association. My questions are on electricity and hydrogen. As you know, decarbonizing steel requires shifting from coking coal to electricity and hydrogen. For that, competitiveness, as you mentioned, is essential. So the first question is on the electricity market design. We come from a reform which was limited under the time pressure and no impact assessment and so on. Parliament and Council have requested now a new impact assessment by 2026. So the question is, will the Commission support a structural reform in the next mandate with an impact assessment? And on hydrogen, as you know, hydrogen delivers the highest abatement potential in sectors like steel. In the hydrogen package, they've introduced the principle of prioritizing hydrogen, especially in the first years, in these sectors with higher abatement. So will the implementation of the gas package support this principle? Thank you.
Okay, well, we managed to cover quite a lot of energy sources there, so that's good. So a question on whether nuclear remains a taboo question and the electricity market reform and implementation of the gas package. But we only have about 2 minutes, so there's a challenge there for you.
I'll try to be concise. Nuclear first, not a taboo at European level. We have a common treaty, the Euratom Treaty, that frames our cooperation in nuclear and that recognises nuclear as part of the energy mix. Of course, the choice of energy mix is a national choice, and some member states have nuclear as part of that, and other member states do not. We work very closely with the member states that have nuclear as part of their energy mix, both under the Euratom Treaty and the requirements on safeguards and safety and inspections, all the many things that are done together. And then we also work at making sure that we have the best policy, that we have the best possible policy framework for nuclear energy as part of the energy mix. And as your question also implies, if you look ahead at 2050 and how do we become climate neutral in 2050, then our analysis suggests that you're going to need nuclear as part of that energy mix. We currently have nuclear at around 13% of electricity, and that is expected, that would probably require to be more or less at the same level in 2050, so around 13%. But of course, in absolute terms, that would mean a higher number of gigawatt, because we are going to electrify and we're going to have a larger electricity as part of our energy system. So we are working with a group of member states in their nuclear alliance, and we are working on the future technology. Small modular reactors is an important one, where we are working to establish a small modular reactors alliance that will be coming out shortly, as announced by Commissioner Simpson not too long ago. So nuclear is very much part of the European energy policy and of the overall European energy mix, but with respect for the national choices, and making sure we operate within the common treaty framework that is the Euratom Treaty. As regards the electricity market design, I think we now have to make sure that there is predictability and stability in the overall framework, the overall regulatory environment for the years ahead. And for that reason, I think it was very good that we had an early agreement, a quick agreement on the electricity market design, and that we have that stability, that predictability to help incentivize investments into clean energy sources. I mentioned renewables specifically, but it is also highly relevant in the context of nuclear, of course. We will be carrying out the review, the report that has been requested by Council and Parliament. Now, whether that would lead to us to consider further changes, that remains to be seen. It's too early to say, and not primarily my role. But I think that stability and predictability really in itself is an important factor in ensuring that we bring the investments that are needed. We have, as you also suggested, created a market regulation for hydrogen and decarbonisation of gas. We're also setting, I think, a clear framework for that. One of the challenges we have with respect to hydrogen is that the green hydrogen market is not yet quite there. There are questions around the the offtake? Will the demand meet the supply? And on the demand side, there is a question, well, will the supply be forthcoming and under what conditions? And it's for that reason that we've established a hydrogen bank. We've got the first domestic auction already ongoing to help essentially facilitate that, to help fill that gap, if you will, between, or that uncertainty between supply and demand, and to help the market take off. With respect specifically to green steel, I was in the European Sustainable Investment event earlier this week and was in a panel with a green steel producer, and it is quite interesting to hear how far that is, and that is now a reality, and clearly an area where Europe can actually come in early with investments and with manufacturing related to green steel. So I think very good news also in a future perspective for European competitiveness and the Green Deal.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for your time. Thank you. And next, I'd like to invite Camille Defar, head of the Jacques Delors Energy Centre, to introduce the report that we're all here for. She will give an overview of the key recommendations, but of course 10 minutes is far too short to learn everything about it, so you can find the whole text on the Jacques Delors website. So Camille, you have the floor.
Thank you, Kira, and welcome everyone. So this, I had a presentation, but it seems that it's not. Okay. Yeah, I think it's not working from here. Great, then you can go to the next slide. Thanks. I'll go very quickly on the first two slides because we've had an amazing introduction from Enrico Letta as well as the Director General Dieter Jurjorgsson, showing how the European Green Deal really became the compass of energy policy action to answer the succession of crises that we've seen over the past 4 years. On the next slide, you can see that we still have a very challenging, a lot of challenges on the 3 energy union objectives: climate neutrality, energy security, and of course prices linked to competitiveness. So you can go to the next slide, and it's interactive. So yes, you can go again. I'm not going to go. It's been very well highlighted by the previous speakers. So on the next slide. So now it's more about the how question. We have to acknowledge that we have very clear objectives and a strengthened regulatory framework that still needs to be improved, but it is still a very good foundation. The weakness that we find in the analysis is that the EU governance and financing instruments that fall short actually of the challenges that arise from the challenges of implementation, but also an increased solidarity in the face of external threats, and coordination needs to answer the vulnerabilities that we have, for example, on the security of supply, clean tech supply chains. In an increasingly challenging environment, I'm not going to go further into this. You all know how the geopolitical threats, economic threats, as well as social threats are increasingly prevalent. So the risk here is really that we would have a diluted ambition during national implementation of the Fit for 55 package at the national level, or a political backlash that we already see currently in the agricultural sector, or also failure to reach political agreements, as we've seen with the failure to reach an agreement to stop importing Russian gas. So we've seen an increase in Russian LNG imports due to the failure of taking into account the difference of weaknesses of member states. So the next slide. The assessment shows that the EU tools are too national. We see the Net Zero Industry Act approach, for example, with very strategic projects that are determined at the national level, which don't really lead to great coordination of an industrial policy for the European Union. Fit for 55 package also have weak compliance mechanisms. So this is also where the EU dimension should be strengthened. EU tools are also too temporary. We've had a very impressive answer to the COVID pandemic with a temporary fiscal package that will end in 2026, and that has really contributed to increasing filling the green investment gap. EU tools are also too voluntary. If you think of the groundbreaking, and it really needs to be highlighted, the demand reduction targets decided upon within Repower EU. It is groundbreaking, but it remains voluntary. Same for NECPs. It is a very soft tool for coordination that actually doesn't really lead to any EU coordination. And finally, the EU tools are mostly regulatory. We can think of the Fit for 55 package again. However, implementing these regulations will require technical knowledge, human capacity, and financial support for all stakeholders. So this combination really endangers the ability of stakeholders to contribute to achieving our goals, which is reaching climate neutrality, but not only that, but while preserving energy security and competitiveness. There are two factors that will actually support our road to climate neutrality. So on the next slide, we need to also acknowledge that the green transition requires different types of resources. We need expertise, we need financing, we need organizational capacity, but also legitimacy and leadership. And this is why part of the report has recommendations on governance and democratic instruments. So the general recommendation, as we mentioned already, is to enhance the energy union and to make it Energy Union 2.0 to deliver the Green Deal while preserving energy security and reasonable prices. And there's 3 pillars: funding, governance, and democratic instruments. And I will go into these in more details in the next slide, starting with additional EU funding. So we are in a very challenging context for both private and public investment with high ECB rates. And we have new needs to increase the resilience of our energy system, to accelerate the transition in troubled geopolitical environment. So increasing common funding would actually allow for more unity against other blocs, more unity against Russia, but also more unity against other major blocs. We can think of China, that is really dominating clean tech supply chains. We see also the need for broad political support for the transition. And this actually comes down to how do we share the risks, the costs, but also the benefits of this transition at all levels of government. So we can think of member states first, but also on citizens. And we can see here again the farmers' movements that also show these distributional issues are quite already prevalent. And lastly, common funding. Why? Because the EU level is the right level to address the huge threat that we're facing in a globalized world. And for that, the single market is a strong asset of the European Union, and that should really be preserved. Mobilizing national state aid really leads to a risk of market fragmentation that really should be avoided. So there's this idea of considering security, competitiveness, and climate neutrality, which are EU Energy Union objectives, as European public goods. Public money is not going to solve the equation, but it plays a role in making, for example, private investments more viable. And there is a very well-identified need of additional EU grants to achieve the EU energy objectives. For example, we can think of the Net Zero Industry Act. We can discuss about the targets, but I think we can all agree that we need to strengthen EU domestic manufacturing capacities in clean techs. And for that, the Innovation Fund is not going to be enough. And we need to strengthen this. We need to have more initiatives such as the Hydrogen Bank, for example. So this means also new instruments and grants on operational costs, which is very different from the instruments that the European Union currently proposes. So there has been calls for more funding from numerous think tanks. And one of the idea that we put forward is to have a clean investment plan with a sovereignty fund that has been proposed by floated around by President von der Leyen before. And the goal would be to finance 3 key priorities: pan-European support schemes for clean techs and grids. As Enrico Letta highlighted, this is going to be a major issue for the next mandate, as well as an EU ARPA-E, so it would be kind of a high-level green R&D agency that would finance cutting-edge new technologies that would increase our resilience. We see, for example, very efficient and batteries technologies, for example, that would use less raw materials. On the next slide. But we don't only need new financial investments, be it from the private or the public sector. We also need organizational and human investment, because what we need to answer is to adapt to new challenges. As we've seen over the past 4 years, so many unexpected challenges arose. And then we also need to acknowledge that there's so many things we're going to learn on the road to climate neutrality. There's technological innovation, there's also the uptake of these innovations, there's the way the society is going to react, as well as the economic structure of our economy that is going to shift. And therefore, we need to integrate different views on this journey from all the stakeholders, but also different governments, levels, and sectors. And for that, one of the ideas is to push forward the definition of a new European energy security strategy that would integrate clean techs, supply chains, and infrastructures to be the backbone of our future competitiveness. And also to strengthen the European energy platform, which is the embryo of common gas purchase for the EU. And that could really strengthen the external position of the EU on the global stage. Then we also need more dialogues. And we've seen the Commission really pushing for those dialogues. And that should be also replicated at the national and regional level. This new regulations will also need skilled people and sufficiently staffed teams, both in the public and private sector, to succeed. And lastly, one of the key issues is also to improve the knowledge that we have on the impacts of the transition, ex ante, but also ex post, because we have also to acknowledge that there's so many things that we don't know. We've never done such a transition at such a fast pace, so we're going to have so many things to learn, and we need to have very good data monitoring frameworks. So on the next slide, maybe very quickly I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but there's this idea of having more interactive governance models that have been used for US high-level research agency that gave birth to Internet, actually. And setting very high-level objectives, and then setting a joint multi-stakeholder governance process to oversee the progress and create space for collaboration and collective learning. So that really looks like the multi-governance framework of the Energy Union. But we could strengthen it with more coordination bodies at different levels. Next slide, please. Lastly, I spoke about financing, I spoke about human and organizational capacity. Part of this requires more resources. And we see that we're getting the tools that we need to achieve the energy goals is a major political challenge. We've seen the question around the energy taxation directive. The Commission is all on board to revise this directive, but it is based on unanimity in the Council. So there also may be a need to show that citizens are willing to advance on that. And so maybe to rebalance the debate, citizen assemblies are a very interesting tool to show that citizens are willing to have an ambitious and fair transition. Just this graph shows you the result of the share of sufficiency measures favored by citizens in citizen assemblies in light blue versus in NECPs, so in dark blue. So it could be interesting to have, for example, a European Climate Assembly to discuss own resources, for example, the hottest topic in town forever. Yeah. So basically, that would be it. And then on the next slide. So what would we need an energy union? We've mentioned, Enrico, Letta mentioned very rightly the high citizen expectations. There's also the need to have, I have this quotation from the economist Philippe Aguillon, who says, without any accommodation of the rules and any evolution of the doctrine, Europe runs the risk of an irreversible decline. And for this, he's referring to the need to have a new common debt to finance an EU DARPA, so an EU high-level agency for green R&D. So that shows you a bit the strong words that are used in academic settings. Last slide. I don't really need to conclude because we're going to have an amazing panel to further discuss this point, so you can go on the next slide. And I wanted to really thank the members of our reflection group on the Energy Union. Part of them are here today, and so I wanted to give them a round of applause because they've been amazing to go along with us on this journey. So thank you so much. And I'm looking forward to the panel debate. Thank you.
Thank you, and also thanks to you, Camille, for giving us such a brilliant overview ahead of the panel. Well, as you mentioned, the panel discussion is up next, so I'd like to invite all of our speakers up onto stage to discuss what progress has been made in EU energy policy and what is still needed. We have some members of the Reflection Group. They are Philip Offenberg, Senior Manager at Breakthrough Energy, an organisation founded by Bill Gates, which looks at boosting clean technology to help reach a decarbonised world. Leigh Hanscher, Professor of European Law at the University of Tilburg and part-time Professor at the Florence School of Regulation. Her research interests include energy market regulation, EU state aid and energy market governance. Susanna Karp, Deputy Executive Director at Clean Tech for Europe. She leads the policy team at the organisation, which aims to bridge the gap between clean tech and policy leaders. And last but not least, Andrei Kovaturi, the Senior Research Associate at the Energy Policy Group, a Bucharest-based independent think tank specialising in energy and climate policy. Well, thank you all for joining us. We'll start with a panel discussion and then we'll open the floor to questions from the audience. So get some thinking. We'll have about 10 to 15 minutes at the end. So I'd like to start by asking our panel to give a brief introduction. Leigh, let's start with you. We've just heard about the need for an Energy Union 2.0. What are the key elements that you see in that?
Thank you very much. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank the organisers for inviting me to speak today or to reflect. I was very lucky to be involved in the earlier report.
You might need to hold the microphone a bit closer to your mouth.
Okay, that we did, I think, some 13 years ago. So that was Energy Union 1. And that was maybe a much easier task in that we were just looking at energy. We weren't really so concerned with climate. We certainly looked at sustainability, but we didn't look at the whole problem from the climate dimension. So that, I suppose, is really the huge difference between then and now. But I was going back thinking of some of the recommendations that we made. We were very much grounded in the market, and the governing institution was the market. And we were looking at how we should make the internal energy market work better. That was really one of I think our fundamental aims. But we have Sami in the audience who was a co-author, and he might help jog my memory. But now this report, of course, encompasses climate. The climate dimension is even more important, perhaps. And we move away from market to governance. And governance, whatever it means, and we could have a whole debate all day about that, but it certainly means a lot more intervention. And most of the instruments that Camille has just listed require more and more intervention. So we depart from that market model. And that has, of course, risks. I think that's undeniable. And we call in the report for more governance, but there has to be a plea for good governance. And I think that's really important to reflect on what that means. You can't do everything in one report, but it's very important, I think, to think about the quality of governance. And what I find a little bit concerning is we pile loads of obligations on the Commission. If you go through the report, the Commission should be doing this, the Commission should be doing that, and that's all very well, but how much can we do or can we expect without overloading the Commission? I think that that's something we really have to reflect on, especially in the last 2 years. We have seen a bit of a departure from the better regulation model that we had or have on paper at European level. So the new electricity market design proposals were put out without any impact assessment. It's usually the case we would have that. All the reforms to the state aid rules, we have had 5 modifications to the state aid framework in 18 months. There has been no consultation in a wider group of stakeholders. It's all been with just the member states, which is a departure from what happened before. Okay, so we needed to act fast, but if we want to transfer more and more responsibilities to the Commission, we have to think carefully about how we ensure good governance. So there is, I think, a strong recommendation, very important recommendation in the report to involve citizens, to ensure more participation. I think that transparency is really important. And here I think we shouldn't forget another institution that has contributed to some improvements that are really important for this debate, and that's the Court of Justice's latest rulings on the Aarhus Convention, which require then that certain decisions are amenable to review and transparent review, and that
Thank you.
organizations should be able to get those. So I think that this is really important, that governance is a leading theme, but it has to be, I think, well thought through.
Excellent, thank you. Susanna, I'd like to turn to you next on this. What for you are the key elements of an Energy Union 2.0?
Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for the invitation to be here. Thank you to the Jacques Delors Institute. It has been an honor and a pleasure to be part of this reflection group. And so what I will share this morning are some of the reflections that I've shared as a member of this group. So as we've heard, the challenges have fundamentally shifted from, let's say, the Energy Union 1.0. And we are now actually entering an age where we very much need to understand how we can support the growth of European indigenous energy, clean tech manufacturing supply chains effectively. And the report does indeed focus quite a bit on this and comes to the conclusion that we actually need a clean investment plan. This is a recommendation that Cleantech for Europe also shares, but I want to actually take a step further from this and share that in the context of the Energy Union 2.0, we also need to start thinking about carbon pricing 2.0 in the European Union, and in fact, the role that carbon pricing can play in unlocking exactly this clean investment plan. More specifically, we've heard from Camille's presentation that indeed Fit for 55 is a weak overall governance framework, and I couldn't agree more, because effectively when it comes to the EU ETS, what Fit for 55 has done is it did the job of the previous revision. The previous revision was trying to fix the trajectory of the EU ETS, the cap. And so because that didn't happen, and we somehow managed to fix the price through a different mechanism, Fit for 55 did that. And it also introduced the CBAM, which had, in the previous parliament, also been voted down. So effectively, we were now doing the homework of the work that should have been done immediately following the Paris Agreement. What this means now is, as we enter a new age of carbon prices, high carbon prices, we need to start thinking what this means for us. And what I think this means for us is, first of all, it means we need a carbon floor price. We have seen that last year we've had the price reach 100, which should give us the hope that by 2030 we can actually see the price reach 200 euros per ton, right? And in that context, many things change. And what can change with a carbon floor price is we can create a balance between guarantees of income and additional revenues, which can be used to mitigate the risk embedded in creating these supply chains that we've just discussed. So I think a carbon floor price is complementary to an Energy Union 2.0, and it would allow us to, on one hand, have safe guarantees for governments that ETS revenues up to 2030 will be of a certain level, while it would also unlock additional revenues that need to be put in a EU sovereignty fund or a EU clean tech investment fund, exactly to encourage private investment to go and fill these investment gaps. We've heard earlier the European Commission say, well, the private money is there. However, the idea that the private money alone will solve it without strong guarantees from the EU side is simply wishful thinking. This would have happened already. And I have two other reflections to share, which I've also...
wrap up quite quickly?
Yes, I will be wrapping them up quite quickly. One reflection I want to share is that the concept of the energy trilemma, which is actually quite present throughout the report, I think we've overcome that to now enter, let's say, an era of unprecedented alignment on our goals, right? We've got the quadruple win lining up for us because prices for technologies are dropping. The revolution cost in renewables means that now we can have lower costs, lower emissions, lower bills for citizens, and actually more decentralized forms which encourage democratization. So I think the era of the energy trilemma is behind us, and the question is how to harness the new synergies of this new era we've entered, which goes into the democratization part of the report. And then finally, I do have a point on Central and Eastern Europe, which I've shared in the context of the discussions for this report, because while the first original reflections on the energy union did indeed leave a blind spot over the dependency on Russian imports, we also know that ever since the enlargement to the Central East European member states, this issue was raised several times by members of the European Parliament from these countries, and indeed it had been put at the core of the more recent reiterations of the energy union. Now, I will emphasize that I think we need to go even further with that, especially as we're considering expanding, right, to also permit countries like Moldova, Ukraine, Georgia to possibly enter the European Union. I think we need to solidify the fact that Central Eastern Europe plays a key role in diversifying our thinking inside the European Union. And the 2.0 version of the European Union should have a strong reflection of the pragmatism that comes from that area, as well as the possibilities for supply chains and skills that it unlocks. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Philip, I'd like to come to you next. What are maybe the more industry side needs for an energy union 2.0?
Yeah, thank you very much. Thanks to the Jacques Delors Institute for organizing this discussion. The Energy Union 1.0 was the Energy Union and Climate Action, right? So I used to work in the Commission at that time, and I think also the previous Jacques Delors reports were very much shaping and influencing the Energy Union and Climate Action back in the day. Now we had the Green Deal, which for me was the Energy Union 1.0 on steroids in a way. So this was back then in the 1.0 we carefully brought in climate. We mixed the market design with the renewables and all this, and the Green Deal just did that 10x basically. Yeah? So and it was good, and we have a regulatory framework. Back in the day with the Energy Union 1.0, it was still a world where Europe was leading by example. Europe was the moral leader on climate. We were trying to make others copy our model. It was the time of the Trump administration. We were hoping that others would do what we do. And guess what? That has actually happened. Now. So in a way that was successful. But now there's massive competition in the world for clean tech. So others are moving as well. The United States has the IRA. We had numbers that apparently in the first 9 months of last year, there were $176 billion in investments in clean tech, public and private investments in the US. So that's impressive. We don't need to talk about China, that they are probably even more impressive. So it's a different world. That means that the next Green Deal or the next Energy Union 2.0 needs to take that into account. Unfortunately, we were all excited 1 year ago around this time when the president of the Commission announced in Davos that she wanted to make Europe the home of clean tech, that we'll have the Green Deal Industrial Plan. Unfortunately, a year later, and Clean Tech for Europe wrote an excellent letter on that, we haven't seen very much. So the STEP program that was supposed to be 10 billion is now essentially non-existent. The Net Zero Industry Act, which was supposed to be the first time that the EU agrees on a list of strategic clean tech sectors, has now been completely diluted, and that was more the Parliament than others. This is really an issue, and that is something that we need to overcome in the next Energy Union 2.0. It's not enough to set targets and regulations, but we need to have an industrial strategy for specific sectors that we focus on. Last point, I think the other new element that we need in the Energy Union 2.0 is security. security of infrastructure. So since the war in Ukraine started, we've seen Nord Stream blow up. We've seen several times underwater cables being attacked, and several other issues, including cyber attacks on infrastructure. We are about to build, I think, the world's biggest offshore wind park in the North Sea. We're about to embark on many other huge infrastructure projects. So we need to think security by design here and make sure that these things are protected well.
Thank you. Andre, let's come to you next. I mean, we've heard a lot from the panel about what their hopes are and stock take of the last few years. What's your view on all of this?
Thank you. Is it working? Yeah. Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. Congratulations once again to Camille and the team for a wonderful report. I agree with the fellow panelists, and I'll try to avoid being redundant on that. So. Last evening over dinner we were discussing on how critical the first report was and how fundamental it was for that age. And I think I was actually contemplating on that at the moment, given the EU elections of this year, we are probably living the most important political test of our time, probably. Because only going back 5 years ago, of course, energy was one of the main elements of, let's say, the agenda, the political agenda, but it was not at the core of it and the source of every issues and challenges that we have today. And moving forward 5 years from now on, the next elections, the elections after next, will be months away from delivering the targets of 2030. So that makes the next commission, the next 5 years, the most challenging, let's say, period on delivering the energy transition and the Green Deal. And I tend to say that what we are living now, it's actually not Energy Union 2.0, it's actually 2.0 beta version. So we are testing what is about to become a 2.0 probably. So what over the next 5 years, and I'll avoid being redundant, but what we will need to do is to do the heavy lifting and the delivering of the ambitious and some of them actually over-ambitious targets for 2030. We will need to take part probably sooner rather than later on the Ukraine reconstruction of the energy systems. We need to deal with enlargement, which will be a big focus over the next 5 years and so on. We will need to develop granular 2040 targets and the framework, the governance framework to deliver that. And all this while keeping, obviously, social cohesion, because everything will be a test for the social fabric as we know it today. And how to do that, because I've seen that in Camille's presentation and here, how to do that, I honestly and personally don't know how to do that. But I know that the first step would be to be very honest with our challenges and risks and opportunities and the investment that we did over the past 2 years or so, but also being honest with what we haven't done, with what needs to be done and what needs to be delivered urgently. And I think we highlighted that in the report quite well. Final point on that, I think it's important to know and to consider the EU elections of this year, but let's not forget that US elections are also coming at the end of this year. And the journey of the next 5 years will be a very different one with a different outcome at the White House. So that's also important on how to deliver, to bridge or to go from 2.0 beta to 2.0 Energy Union.
Thank you. I'd like to pick up on that point you make, because one of the key recommendations of the report is more democracy, more transparency and strengthened governance. Susanna, let's come to you next on this. What improvements do you want to see when it comes to the involvement of citizens and stakeholders in this dialogue?
Well, first of all, I will reflect on the recommendation of the report to have a citizens' assembly. I think that is fantastic, but I think it has to be a permanent citizens' assembly to be following the climate and energy transformation. So I think what we've learned from the Conference on the Future of Europe is that sort of ad hoc assemblies or sort of once-in-a-lifetime experience does not actually yield any concrete results. We're also seeing that European Citizens Initiative, they haven't been enough to actually trigger Commission proposals. So we need to start thinking more radically about how to bring the citizens into this. However, coming back to carbon pricing, I think ideas we haven't yet explored are creating a direct link between citizens in the European Union and EU ETS revenues. I think we could be talking about citizens' carbon dividends, right, to support investments at individual level as well as community level into new forms of infrastructure, and energy. And so we have to be prepared mentally that even the models of ownership, of economic ownership over these resources will have to undergo a profound transformation. So we can expect more and more community energy projects, but also in terms of the energy, the forms of energy we'll need for 2040. So tidal energy, that's going to require community ownership of some sort. And so I think we can explore a bit more with democratizing the economics underpinning the energy system as we've known it to date, and the ETS revenues once again can help. Thank you.
Thank you. That's an interesting connection, given we'll see ETS2 beginning to hit people, so actually the ETS revenue is going to them as well. Philip, I'd like to come to you on this. What key conversations do you think need to take place, maybe between the clean tech industry and national governments in the EU as we look ahead?
Yeah, I think there's a big gap between policymakers in the capitals and the clean tech industry, especially the emerging clean tech industry, so companies that are not yet incumbents, but the same is also true for Brussels. I think what we really need, and that's coming back to my first point, is industrial strategies, so a clear list of priorities and industrial strategies by sector. So because the way we've done climate policy in the past in Brussels, and I really don't want to criticize it, it's been legitimate to a certain extent, but we set a target, we implement a measure. For instance, we ban the combustion engine by 2035, but we're not necessarily doing enough to enable our industry to deliver on it. And that was still okay in a time where clean tech was a European show, where we were the only ones doing this, right? But now there's global competition, and whenever we have measures like that, we need to think about how do we empower our industry to actually compete in that market. So I mean, in the battery, in the EV area, we tried to do it with the Battery Alliance, but still, producing batteries is a third more expensive in Europe than in China and the US, so that's tough. Another recent worst practice was on aviation in Germany. So Germany has among the most ambitious targets for blending sustainable aviation fuels. So airlines will have to deliver on that in 2025 or 2026. But what happened now, there's a budget crisis, and they cut all spending that went to sustainable aviation fuel companies. Yeah? So there's a handful of really strong early stage companies that is actually producing the technology to be able to produce clean jet fuels. But they're so early stage, they're still depending on research grants, they're still depending on government money, and now the government just cut that. So then I'd find that a bit contradictory. I mean, you cannot have on the one side an industry target, expect them to deliver, and then cut all the means that would enable them to do so.
Thank
so
you.
What we need really, I think, to summarize, is a better understanding of technology and industry within the civil service on European and national level, and also politicians need to get more interested maybe also in the technologies that we're talking about.
Thank you. I think if we hear one thing from the industry, it's that they need predictability. Andre, I'd like to come to you next. We're looking at implementing the Green Deal across all of Europe and in Central and Eastern Europe as well, and also working in partnership with Ukraine. How do you see this need for democracy and transparency in regard to that?
So I think it's very important. Susanna mentioned the importance of looking at very different let's say starting points of regions and context. And I think Central and Eastern Europe is a very complex, and if you want, is not only indicative, it's actually representative for how complicated the transition process will be. Because I'm saying it's complex because it obviously has still issues on relying on fossil fuels, not only for electricity, but for energy as well. It still lacks or has adequacy issues when it comes to grids. Pricing, energy prices are causing major, let's say, disruptions to the economy and to the end users. Energy efficiency is poor. But on the flip side, some investments in the networks have been done more recently than in Western Europe, so there is a sort of an advancement, at least in some pockets of regions. In Romania alone, for instance, in the last 4 years, we've converted consumers to prosumers in the range of tens of thousands. due to subsidies and due to available, let's say, or dedicated, if you want, European funds that are available for that region. In Greece alone, the ambition to go from highly relying on coal to, phasing out coal in just a number of years is also a good practice, and issuing sustainability bonds is once again. So it's a very complex, let's say, region with very different starting points, with the need to once again foster social cohesion and keep social cohesion, compact. But I think that speaks volumes to how important it is, the coordination, the planning, and also the cooperation, I would say, in between industry on one side, of course, that will drive and arguably spearhead actually the transition, and public authorities, be they local, national, European. I think that's important. It's a very good, let's say, laboratory, if you want, if you like keeping the limits of the comparison to what the transition is, for the larger EU, let's say, geography.
Thank you. I'd like to bring you in on this as well. How do you see the need to improve governance as we move into the next Commission mandate?
Thank you. Well, as I already indicated, I think we need a great deal more transparency to allow people to see what's going on, and also more candid evaluations of what has worked and what has not. I think that we need a lot more citizen involvement and decentralization. Otherwise, I'm sure hardly anybody on the street knows about the climate law and 2050 goals. And I'm sure if we ask people in this room, do we believe that we get to net zero in 2050? I think the show of hands might be an interesting exercise to do. Would be rather thin. So I don't think that we have much trust. I think that is really important. I think that's missing. And I can give maybe an example from the country I live in, the Netherlands, which I think is really interesting. Just as you mentioned, we have huge subsidies to get people to install solar panels. Everybody does this. They're all encouraged to be prosumers. But what happens? The prices of electricity drop, and so the tariffs that had been agreed with these prosumers to sell back their surplus electricity too high. So all the contracts are cancelled going forward. So that doesn't do a great deal for trust. It should have been perhaps part of a coherent plan to do something else with that surplus electricity. So yeah, you can't keep people on board, I think, unless you have a really coherent vision. And you can't expect that to come from here. It has to be local and consistent.
And staying with you, what do you think are the biggest lessons that the EU needs to learn from the last mandate and everything that went on with the Green Deal and also with the external pressures? And how should that influence the next mandate?
Big question. I mean, I think every conference you go to and every speech you hear, and we heard it also from the Director General, the next phase is all about implementation. So we've seen a huge package of legislation being pushed through. The person I wrote the first report with, Mark van der Wouder, he used to say it was great fun to become an energy lawyer, which he was and I am, because you could go home and read a piece of legislation that was 2 pages, and the next day you were an energy lawyer. Now you have to read thousands of pages and try and actually understand what's in them. And my plea, if you read the decarbonisation package, you read, I think the first 200 pages are recitals, which is some sort of existential thing going on there. I don't know what it means. And then you try and work out what this regulation is supposed to mean. And there are no coherent definitions. The legislation is a total mess. And so we have to learn, I think, going forward. We've tried to do a lot, we've gone too fast, and quality has really suffered.
Andre, I'd like to come to you on this. What lessons do you think the EU has learned in the last 5 years, and how can they be put into place in the next 5?
Well, I mean, let's look at the bigger context. I think the energy security, let's say, definition as a whole has been changing for quite a decade, I would say. So it's evolving from the, let's say, first 2 layers of owning own resources, to importing, let's say, end products, energy end products, to what is now the renewable technology or clean technologies. But this, let's say, emergence and this transition is not very smooth. I would say it's quite bumpy given the context of the last 2 years, and obviously on the critical raw materials, I think we are quite, we are not in a good position on that, and I think the lessons that we learn is that we cannot replace obviously one dependency on fossil fuels on another one. There are very different markets. I mean, a disruption on the critical raw materials is a very different one than one on, let's say, gas or other energy products that would basically disrupt the economies. But at the same time, it's important to plan ahead. And planning ahead for critical raw materials and the whole process, mining, refining, and all that takes a lot of time and takes a lot of money. And we cannot expect results overnight in that. Opening a mine in Europe will take at least, I don't know, 1 decade, given the the permits and the quality or let's say the standards of social and economic, let's say, assessments that we are doing before opening that. So that will take time, and it will take even more time to reach economies of scale for that to be competitive with what was mentioning before to manufacture anything at competitive prices. But we'll need to see how also the geopolitics will let's say be shaped by that, because of course if we are doing that, then probably China will see an opportunity to increase prices just to hedge on the risk of EU buying less from them in 10 years or 15 years. So it's complicated, and I think these are the lessons that we kind of learned in the past few years. But it's the delivery time, and 2030 is actually the time to actually act in some sense and to deliver, or at least not deliver on the high ambitious targets, but getting there, as close as possible.
Thank you. Philip, I'd like to bring you in as a response to that. How concerned is the clean tech industry when it comes to that supply of critical raw materials? And what lessons can we learn from maybe finance? You mentioned the example of Germany earlier.
I think many are very concerned about the supply of critical minerals, but not only the emerging clean tech industry, but also the existing players. So the link to finance, I didn't quite get that.
Lessons learned from finance as well, if we're speaking about lessons learned in the last 5 years.
Okay, lessons learned. Well, I think on finance, it's public budgets are empty. That's the main lesson to learn. There were some missed opportunities. The Next Gen EU facility, 750 billion euros. We looked into that with the OECD, how the money was spent on green tech or on the 37% green earmarking. That was probably met, but the money wasn't exactly used to advance new industries, to advance technology, to develop some competitive edge, right? So that was a big missed opportunity. Now public budgets are empty. Now we need to become a bit more creative. And I think there are 4 things that we should do. The first is de-risking. So the EU has the InvestEU program, which is very good. There was recent under the MFF discussions, there was the idea with STEP to top up InvestEU by 7.5 billion euros. That would be crucial, and it's blocked right now. I mean, it doesn't look like this is going to happen, but it would be very important, because without this, the EIB and other implementing partners of InvestEU cannot invest in clean tech. So please, if anyone from the Commission is still here, and from the member states most notably, please make sure that this gets unblocked. This is important. The second de-risking piece are guarantees, and here big praise to the Commission for the wind power action plan, where they really saw there's an issue in the supply chain. The European OEMs are suffering, and they addressed it very fast over the summer. Suddenly there was a wind power package action plan, very good, and that included an EIB facility for counter guarantees, a 5 billion facility. So because these European OEMs had the problem that they had very full order books. No more bank wanted to give them a performance guarantee or guarantee for these things because they saw a cluster risk, and the EIB now steps in and is unlocking that so that these OEMs in the wind sector can receive guarantees again. Many other sectors, many other emerging technologies for first-of-a-kind projects, so things that have never been deployed, they're considered risky. They will also need such guarantees. They would also need the support from the EIB, thinking of long-duration energy storage, power to X, many other things. So if there's a way to extend this EIB guarantee to other sectors, that would be very good. Third thing that needs to be done is to tap into existing pots of money, notably the ETS revenues that the national governments have. We have now fantastic instruments on European level, such as the Innovation Fund and the Hydrogen Bank. So I hope that more national money can be channeled through these existing European instruments. And I'm sure Susanna will also speak more about that later. And then the fourth is, find other existing pots of money. I think Tete said it earlier, the private sector, institutional investors, banks, insurances, there's a lot of money. It's almost not at all used for clean tech. We need to find a way to access that capital.
Susanna, let's go to you on finance and also on other lessons that the EU has learned.
I will start from the lessons learned, and what we're learning is that in Europe we have some sort of an inertia in overcoming the sort of the state of mind that we have comfortably been in for a really long time. Hence, we get caught by surprise when all sorts of events happen. And so I think what we finally need to do, looking back at, let's say, the relocation of the solar industry over the past decade, and sort of the way in which we have not actually been sufficiently assertive when it comes to developing our own industrial supply chains. I think we need to learn from that, shake off the inertia, and start accepting that we are actually in a race against time. Looking at how other countries are doing this, well, China is doing scale at an enormous pace. Just last year alone, I think they've added to their grid the equivalent, something close to the equivalent in terawatt hour of France. Of low carbon electricity. So we need to move fast, and we need to understand those synergic elements that can help us put together everything we've done well to date, right? Because it's not just that we've been in an inertia, we've taken the time for deep reflection, we fixed a lot of things. The point is, we've fixed all these things. We took our time so that now we can go fast. And this is what we need to do. This is not the moment to take a pause. It is the moment to actually accelerate on everything we've done to date, and make sure that we come out, let's say, on the winning side of this profound transformation, also in competitiveness landscapes.
Thank you. We've got some time for questions from the audience. So does anyone have some questions? We have two at the back on the right. Do we have a microphone? Again, plenty of time for you to think them up while we get the microphone. So over there on the back, the man in the checked shirt. I think it should be working. That sounds like it's working. There you go.
Right, so Happy New Year indeed. It kind of reminds me, the conversation, a bit of Le Petit Prince, right? There's this chapter where the scientists are looking at the elephant, and we're talking about transparency on the one hand, we're talking about good governance, citizen ownership, but I have the feeling that we're not quite getting the elephant, except for Ms. Karp, who mentioned indeed energy communities. So I'm wondering in this sense, right, these citizen-led initiatives that have good governance and that do encourage citizens owning the transition, I wonder to what extent the report actually focuses on that, and what hope do we have for this taken up in the future, essentially. Cheers.
Well, that's the first time I've ever heard the Little Prince mentioned during an event. I'm very happy. Who wants to come in on this, how the report deals with citizenship involvement? Susanna, maybe, or Andre?
I've already stated my point. So I think indeed we're on the precipice of a new era in this regard, and we're not seeing enough attention, and not necessarily in the report, but just in our policies and in the political discussions in the EU on this front. And now we are seeing some discontent, across the European Union, and we have to accept that this will be these kind of difficult dialogues will have to be part of the transition. However, it would be ideal if we could, let's say, avoid them bubbling up in furious ways by having a deeper approach to more involvement in the first decision-making process. But I'm curious to hear what others are saying as well.
Andre, what's
Just
your
a quick
view on
point.
this?
I think connecting with what I said at the beginning, I think this is the political test even of that. So, I mean, endorsing the plans or endorsing, let's say, the agenda that the Commission or the candidates for the next EU elections will put forward is also a test of whether or not we believe in this, let's say, Energy Union 2.0 beta or whatever you want to call it, or not. You know, it is a test of the pledges and the efforts done over the past 2 years. So, power to the people in the sense of the vote that we will all cast in June. Yeah.
Do we have another question? We have some at the front here. If you could say your name and your organisation.
Michael Villa, Executive Director of Smart Energy Europe, Smart Energy. Dieter, the Director General at the beginning, was very clear on the need that we needed to accelerate renewable development. Yes, very true. There is a challenge related to that. The congestions that might be created if we have a consumption that is not able to accommodate this variability in generation. And this leads to costs. The 1.3 billion investment that we needed to have every year might be a very short figure if we are keeping the current unflexible consumption. Indeed, the consumers not being to be actively participated in support this clean energy transition. So my point is, yes, we needed to have a clean investment plan. Yes, we need to have a lot of resources, but we also need to be very efficient in the allocation of these resources. Otherwise, we are gonna waste resources. We might need much more resources on that. That's why we need to have a system efficiency regulation or governance that is not only about how to allocate money, but also to identify where these money are related.
Thank
you.
Then
also, sorry, another point related to that, yes, in the Jacques Delors plan, we are talking about a lot of coordination that is required at the European level, but we need to have national collaboratory governance, because there is still a lot of silos approach at member states level and needs to be tackled. Thanks.
Thank you. Does anyone want to come in on the need to ensure that actually this works when it comes to grids and congestion?
I think there are some lessons in Netherlands.
Yes, there's certainly lessons in the Netherlands. As many of you know, the Netherlands is a kind of a narco-state, we call it these days. I mean, we grow a lot of cannabis and other things we do, which are actually, they really use a lot of electricity. There is, of course, a problem of connections. I'm kind of joking, but our distribution grids especially are totally overloaded, but also our national transmission network has just been given a huge boost in investment to try and cope with this. But the real problem is at the distribution level and setting priorities, which I think is what you're talking about, which is why I'm joking about in fact, these cannabis farms are sort of first in line. They just take over old industrial plots, as the zinc industry and the aluminium industry are pulled out and gone and got their subsidies in the US. There are huge areas that are bought up just for to get the connections. That's what people really need. They don't really know what their plans might be in the future, but they want to make sure they are in an industrial site which has connections to the grid. It's become a huge asset.
Do you think managing this needs to be done at the national level or the EU level? Who needs to decide how this is tackled?
It's a mixture, because we have European legislation that restricts how you can innovate with tariffs. At distribution level, it restricts how you can invest in the future. I think we were talking about that last night as well. So you need to actually really change the model that we have. You need to change the model at that we have at European level, which is very short term. And that drives everything at national level on a very short term basis. So yeah, I agree with you. You need a longer term vision of coordination.
Thank you. We have a question at the back as well.
I'll try and straight. I'm Enrico from ICE, the European Initiative for Energy Security. Fully subscribe to the idea that we need a European fund, whether it's called a sovereignty fund or something else, that might take us some time to get there. It won't be enough if we, at the same time, don't have credible defensive measures at the border of the European Union to protect European industry from not to make.
If you hold the mic closer to your mouth. Oh, okay. At all. Keep shouting then.
Long story short, we're not talking about economic defensive package, whatever that's called. We're talking about finally maybe enforcing some sanctions on Russian, etc. What does the panel think about what else could be done outside of spending another 2 or 3 years talking about the regulation to protect European industry from unfair trade practices from players like China?
So who wants to take this on? What more needs to be done to protect EU, particularly clean tech, or just all industry? Susanna, maybe?
Well, first of all, I couldn't agree more. We absolutely need to strengthen our defense at European level. But I think what Camille shared actually in her presentation was something really relevant that we have not been talking about enough, which is that since the illegal war of aggression against Ukraine started, the European Union has actually increased its imports of LNG from Russia. So in that regard, the sanctions have been utterly insufficient, and we see that they have actually created this possibility that is, quite frankly speaking, I think a very disappointing chapter in our European history. And so, first of all, that should have been fixed. The problem is that our inertia that I referred to earlier made us lose a massive opportunity in terms of, instead of realizing that we need to swiftly move away from fossil gas, we actually spent a lot of months looking for sort of replacements to pipeline gas. And some of those replacements were imported from Russia at extremely high prices. So again, we need to just snap out of the state of mind that has brought us to this situation in the first place, that has created this dependency, and then apply the new way of thinking to all our other economic relationships. Now, of course, the carbon border adjustment mechanism is an interesting tool that we absolutely must safeguard and implement correctly, because it is creating a level playing field across various economic sectors, and it also protects the European markets from being flooded with, let's say, fake claims, very cheap, maybe green steel, but we can't verify the claims for the steel being made in a green way. And so in a sense, I think we're actually doing quite a lot at the moment, and it's just important that we actually keep what we've achieved in this parliament term, so particularly the CBAM, and then look to develop other normative tools that can help us at the geopolitical level. Yeah.
Thank you. Philip, you'd like to come in on this?
Yeah, I think this is a really important question. And I want to come back to something I said earlier, which is a better understanding of economic sectors, because I think these threats are sometimes very sector specific. So coming back to the wind example, where the Commission has handled that really well. So they noticed, okay, there's a problem with unfair competition in the wind supply chain, and they noticed this relatively early on, and they saw a risk, okay, we might have a similar scenario to what happened with PV in the past, right? And here the response was a package. So I mean, there was this de-risking facility to help the European players. There was a trade investigation, or signals of a trade investigation. There was an investigation into what can we do in terms of qualitative criteria and cybersecurity criteria that would help our industry. So it was a very sophisticated answer that required some preparation, though, and some good understanding of the microeconomics of the sector. Yeah? So it's not a debate about macroeconomics and trade flows only. It's also about sector by sector, microeconomics, understanding what's really going on in the supply chain and which tools and levers we have to react. And I think we need more intelligence and more understanding in governments in Europe and on that. And the second part of the answer for me is working more closely with our allies, especially the United States. We were a bit disappointed. I think many were. The last EU-US summit did not deliver this critical raw materials alliance. It did not deliver the steel and aluminium club that would also have had a carbon component. This, I hope, can be fixed very soon. Of course, difficult in an election year, but I think there's a vital interest, actually, should be for both sides to work more closely together, to align on standards, to align on regulations, to also give a bigger playing field for our own industry to scale. We call it internally the clean transatlantic marketplace. And I think that definitely needs to come back on the front burner as soon as possible.
Thank you. We're beginning to run out of time, but before we go to the closing statements, I'd just like to ask all of you, obviously we're seeing the next Commission mandate soon, if you were to become European Commission President at the end of the year, what is the one proposal or one reform that you would put forward first? Andre?
Well, that's a tough one. Where to start from? No, I think moving forward, I think one important conversation that we need to have is about enlargement, because this is a project, a program, a project, an ambition that on the energy side, at least, is something that we haven't seen before. We haven't, accommodated new members with this starting points, with these issues, with these challenges as they are today. And I think this is critical. In this sense, Central and Eastern Europe will play a major role, I think, into that. And I think it's important to understand the partnerships and to develop that from now on, and how this will actually affect EU's targets for 2040, which is also very important.
Lei, what's your one proposal or reform, just quickly?
Very quickly, it has to be demand reduction. We can't go forward only looking at the supply side.
Susanna?
It's the summary of the previous points, which is using carbon pricing revenues to advance a form of European economic citizenship that involves exactly citizens through direct revenues, but also puts some of the revenues into a European sovereignty fund to develop indigenous clean tech manufacturing.
And Philip, what's your wish?
It would be a communication in the first 100 days to say that we'll bring an investment plan that includes de-risking guarantees, the ETS revenues, and a boost to InvestEU.
Excellent, thank you. Well, to close our panel discussion, I'd like to get your key message as we look ahead to an Energy Union 2.0. So, Andre, what's your key message to everyone in the room today?
So once again, I think it's time to move from the 2.0 beta Energy Union to the 2.0, but to do that, it's critical to understand what is happening this year with everything that is going on with the elections. And once again, I think this is the political test of our generation in terms of energy and climate policies. Yep.
Let's bring it down the line, Lee.
Key message. I think we definitely need a plan B, because we're not going to be fossil fuel free by 2050.
Susanna?
My key message is this is not the time for a pause. We can't afford a pause. We're running a marathon. Endurance is key. We need to accelerate on the progress we've made.
Thank you.
I think the term higher ambition, which usually meant higher emissions reduction, now needs to be changed into higher shares for our own industry in the markets of the future, which will be in clean tech.
Excellent. Well, thank you all for the panel. Thank you for the discussion. So as our panel return to their seats, we can have our final event of the very packed agenda. I'd like to invite Anne Mettler, Vice President for Europe at Breakthrough Energy, to give the closing remarks. So Anne, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the invitation. Congratulations to Notre Europe and also to Camille for really an outstanding study that couldn't be more timely, as Europe finds itself in a perfect storm of what I like to call the geopolitization of economy and business. I think nowhere has this played out more visibly than in energy. As has already been mentioned several times this morning, natural gas has been weaponized against us by Russia. We're also seeing now an increasing number of attacks on our critical energy infrastructure. For example, the Baltic Connector pipeline that links Finland and Estonia. And we have, of course, almost a complete dependence on critical raw materials and solar panels from a country that does not remotely lie in our sphere of influence. And all this severely compromises what I like to call what really an issue that I would like to throw into this debate, and that I like to call energy resilience. And I say this here as a retired think tanker. I think that we need new intellectual paradigms. Some of what we discuss here, the Green Deal or Energy Union, are not really fit for purpose for the seriousness of the times that we're living through. So how do I define energy resilience? For me, energy resilience is not being overly reliant on any one source of energy. We have lived through, or we have learned the hard way, what it meant to be so reliant on natural gas from Russia. So not being overly reliant on any one source of energy, nor any one country, because Europe is, of course, de facto replacing a dependency on Russia in fossil energy with a dependency on China in clean technologies. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm just back from the World Economic Forum in Davos, where, to my great surprise, I have to say, European leaders repeatedly talked about the importance of the single market. And I think that's a great tribute to you, dear Enrico, Letta, and also to the Belgian EU presidency, that you have finally managed to get leaders to focus on what really matters. Because at least in my mind, and I'm old enough to know, that the original Brussels effect was not regulating technologies produced elsewhere. The original Brussels effect was integrating and harmonizing markets as a driver of economic prosperity and global power, and as a political project with purpose and impact. The single market grew the pie, while so much of what goes on today is bickering over a shrinking, aging, and decomposing pie as industry after industry contracts and is often lost to others. The importance of the Green Deal in this context truly cannot be overstated. After years of managing many crises, and as some of you know, I had a front row seat on some of these, such as the Greek financial crisis, migration, terrorism, Brexit, Trump, there was again a vision at the beginning of the political mandate, this political mandate. There was again a vision, something to collectively work towards and actually underpinned by substantial support from voters. What an opportunity that was. It truly was at the time what Ursula von der Leyen called Europe's man on the moon moment. Now, 4 years in a pandemic and 2 wars later, we've arrived at a sobering moment as a growing number of people, the much talked about citizens, these citizens are starting to wonder about what precisely the deal in the Green Deal is supposed to be. And even the most ardent supporters of the Green Deal, among whom I count myself, those supporters are starting to doubt that we can regulate ourselves to net zero. To add insult to injury, we're short of funds, severely, because the energy transition is very costly and it requires real political choices, real political trade-offs. And there was much talk about democratic governance this morning, and I think that's extremely important because one of the pressing questions really is whether democracies are still capable of the kind of systemic change that is required. It may not be a coincidence that the country that has managed to deploy, to scale, and to reduce the cost of all mainstream clean technologies, wind, solar, batteries, and EVs, is China. And that is also precisely the country that could use careful policy planning to map out and then operationalize the complex value and supply chain that underpins a clean energy system. China's dominance in the global mining and critical raw materials didn't fall from the sky. It was years in the making, and it is, of course, only superseded by its processing capabilities of these critical raw materials, which tops 90%, giving it de facto a global monopoly. So this is the backdrop, and this is why we must now double down in ensuring that we are not left behind in all the emerging clean technologies that are still in the pipeline. From clean hydrogen, long-duration energy storage, to carbon dioxide removal technologies, fusion, sustainable fuels, to name just a few. And as some of you know, I've spent 5 years running the internal think tank at the European Commission, and I also chaired the interinstitutional EU Foresight Network. And if I have one key takeaway from that time, it is that the world is in a quest for technology supremacy, and emerging clean technologies are an important part of that race. But the key to clean energy are the following: deployment, scale, and reducing the cost, which of course brings us back to the single market, because without the single market, no scale. Without the single market, no value proposition to invest. Without the single market, needlessly high costs. On all three counts, we are failing. Despite all the talk about strategic autonomy, we have failed to grasp that true sovereignty comes from occupying and driving and spearheading the technology and knowledge frontier, not from regulating and micromanaging it. So where does that leave us? Firstly, starting immediately, we need a new approach to the Green Deal. It needs a proper business and investment case. And if you want to see what happens when state aid is strictly imposed and sending our companies, our unsubsidized companies, into global competition with heavily subsidized companies, then please study carefully what happened to European industry in wind, in solar, in 5G, to mention just a few. So the issue in state aid needs to be how we can mobilize sizable EU funds for strategic industries. See Ursula von der Leyen's idea for a sovereignty fund. It's not about less subsidies, it's about subsidies that work. Another question, how can we provide more incentives, fewer sticks, like the IRA, which was mentioned? How can we make our own instruments, such as the IPSIs, the important projects for common European interests? How can we make them fit for purpose? So far, none of these IPSIs has really produced a global technology leadership. Are these instruments fit for purpose? Secondly, rather than focusing on measures that de facto drive up the cost of the energy transition, can we not focus on measures that can actually lower the cost of the energy transition? Much could happen if we had more standardization, if we created bigger markets, if we had faster permitting and rollout, more digitalization and public services, more public guarantees, and de-risking measures to spur investments. More blended finance vehicles along the lines of the EU Catalyst partnership that we helped get underway. A better aligned internal and external industrial policy with global growth and CO2 emissions largely taking place outside the EU. It's about time we practice less internal navel gazing and more global horizon scanning. To my knowledge, the Global Gateway has no intersection with the EU's industrial policy, and I'm sorry to say that makes no sense. Thirdly, and looking to the other important report that's been mentioned, that's in the pipeline, the Draghi report, we need a competitiveness strategy that is rooted in European realities, which is a permanently high price of energy, a resource-poor geography. We don't have oil and gas. We have strained public finances. We have an aging society. We are a continent that has largely missed the digital revolution. And against this backdrop, what are still the inherent strengths we have? The competitive advantage, the unique value proposition to businesses and investors. And that is what we must urgently figure out. Urgently, if we don't want to become a museum. And let me say, because I'm oftentimes criticized for being very outspoken about some of Europe's shortcomings, I have devoted my entire career to trying to the European project, to trying to make Europe more competitive. I know that Europe has these important strengths, but we really need to zero in on them. And this is a time to do so now. It's a unique political opening that we have this year. So let's have an honest debate and let me conclude on that point. Again, going back to my time at the European Commission, I had barely arrived when I was told, quote, "No one loves the single market," end quote. So that may well be true, and it may also explain why that despite countless pledges, I honestly have stopped to count, the countless pledges in Council conclusions to complete not only the energy union, but also the capital markets union, the banking union, the digital single market, you name it, our leaders have failed to deliver time and time again. So this leaves me with only one question. Will this time be different? Thank you so much.
Excellent. Thank you. An excellent final question to leave us on. We thank you everyone for joining us today. We hope you feel inspired by an Energy Union 2.0. If you want to find out more, you can find the report on the Jacques Delors website. But thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you to all our speakers and everyone who worked on this behind the scenes. And we now invite you to stay, have a chat over lunch. Thank you.